All right.
Oh,
Here we go. Here we go. Sorry for everybody for the technical difficulties here. Welcome to our latest edition of Office Hours, where we are hoping to have a conversation about hope, the science of hope, and how it relates to resilience. Today, I am joined by some very special guests, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute, but they are all graduates of the University of Pennsylvania Masters in Applied Positive Psychology.
No, Lisa, does this happen to Colbert?
They're also, I'm sorry? They're also practitioners. And today, as we go through the show, hopefully we won't have too many more technical difficulties, but we'll also be taking any questions from the audience that come up, and you're welcome to enter them into the chat. But let's go ahead and start with Lisa, and just quick intros. We'll go around the horn.
sure. Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. My name is Lisa Sansom. I work in the field of organizational development and change management. I've been doing that for about 20 years. I'm also an executive and leadership coach and graduated from the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program about 10 years ago. So I really play in that intersection of coaching and organizational development, leadership development, and that's a little bit about me.
Great. Andrew, why don't you go next?
Great. Andrew Soren. I am based in Toronto, Canada. I run a company that is called Eudaimonic by Design. Eudaimonic by Design focuses at the intersection of basically work and well-being, how you design organizations from a culture and leadership perspective to allow people to thrive and be the very best that they can be. I am also a graduate of this Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program, and I have been teaching in that program at University of Pennsylvania for the last 7 years.
Great. Thanks for joining us. Chad?
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Chad Thomas. I am a fellow graduate of the MAP program. I graduated 3 years ago. I work at a coaching positive psychology tech startup called BetterUp, and our mission is to really transform the way people work and live through a behavioral science-based approach, and we do that through our very innovative coaching ecosystem. And so it's really an honor to be able to use my degree at work every day. I know that's something that gets me jazzed every time I wake up, and I'm really excited to see everybody's Superpower of Hope discussion and hear everybody's stories and anecdotes. I'm really excited for this call today.
Great. And Ken?
Morning, afternoon. Ken Shainman, and I've been a strategic consultant, software entrepreneur, ran one of the nation's largest summer camps. I'm currently doing some work at Wharton, and most recently was the executive director of the International Positive Education Network. I, too, have a master's in applied positive psychology as well as an MBA. And I, too, am really excited to engage in this conversation. This is an important topic always, and rarely more so than now.
Yeah, I think it is. So I guess I just want to get us started by saying that, hope to me seems pretty straightforward, but I think there's probably a science to it. And I think in today's world, it's important to understand what's behind hope. So can we understand what is some of the science behind hope, and why is it so important?
Sure, I can start with that. If you'd like, hope is a concept that has been studied from a psychological perspective, for probably about 30 to 40 years in different contexts. The thing that really unites all of us, as you've already heard about, is this field of positive psychology. And positive psychology is often this study within the social sciences that is really aimed at looking at states and traits, or the way that we kind of show up and the way that we think, feel, and do on the positive end of the spectrum. And so one of the ways in which you can think about psychology in general is as looking at a spectrum of how people are thinking, feeling, and doing. Actually, I think that you might have the languishing, resilient, and flourishing slide. That might be a helpful starting point. If you think about the way that people show up as at one end of the extreme, as languishing and just really being really struggling, whether that's about depression or anxiety, or just in general a general feeling of helplessness or hopelessness. That would be one end of the extreme. At the other end of the extreme, you have people who seem to remarkably be able to flourish in any context that you might throw at them, and those people seem to be very, very capable of thriving in the face of almost anything. And then somewhere in the middle of that is the people who are just resilient, who are getting by, and who are able to not just being able to kind of survive in this particular moment, but potentially use adversity as a means of even getting closer to that flourishing state. And so when we talk about hope, we're really talking about that resilient state in the middle there, and the people who are able to not only just be resilient, but also move a little bit closer to the flourishing. So that's the starting point. When we think about hope, we're also really thinking about a psychological perspective of hope that's really geared around three major things. It's geared around a sense of optimism, and realistic optimism. And by that I mean, when people think about the future, they see the possibility of good things happening. This is true of the most resilient people in the world. When studies have been done on who is the most resilient, the people who are most resilient have this perspective of optimism about the future. They often explain the world and the situation to themselves in optimistic ways. And what those optimistic ways generally have in common is that there's a sense of agency. People feel like they have some sort of control over the future. And those two things, that sense of I can look into the future and I can see good things happening, and I feel like I have some control over that, are the two ingredients that really make up what hope is all about when it's studied in a psychological context. So when we're talking today about the superpowers of hope, we're really talking about those two things. I'm able to look into the future and potentially see good things, realistically good things in that future, and I feel like I have some control over being able to make it happen. Let me stop and ask my colleagues to weigh in if there's anything else.
I'd love to add something. It's important when looking at hope. Hope can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, and want to make sure that it's not being confused with wishful thinking. So whenever, or that maybe initial burst of optimism that is going to wane quickly. Every time I see a Marvel movie, I leave the movie and go, you know what? I'm gonna be working out 5 days a week from here on in. I want to get in that kind of shape. That's a burst of wishful thinking. That's not the kind of hope that is likely to lead me toward any particular goal unless I put other things in place as well.
So again, how do I distinguish between the two? So if I'm a leader and my organization is struggling, and I'm saying that we're going to do better, what makes it hope versus just wishful thinking?
Well, if I have a startup, I can say that my startup is going to have $1 billion worth of sales in year 3. That sounds terrific. That's wishful thinking. If it's going to turn into hope, there has to be something behind it. So what is the plan? What is the path that's going to lead us? What are we going to be doing? What are the activities? And then the other piece is what is going to motivate, what is going to activate the actions? What's going to give us the agency to get there? It may be the best plan in the world, but we also need to have the energy behind that plan. So just having a want is wishful thinking. Having a clear goal, we're going to make $1 billion by creating XYZ products in these markets, etc. And then the steps that are going to take us there, that builds a whole framework for hope.
So in the 90s, we were given a concept called the BHAG, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. Does that still fit into the hope framework?
Yeah, I would say it definitely does, because you can have a big, hairy, audacious goal, because goals are a critical part of hope theory. You have to have goals. And your goal can be big, hairy, and audacious. And you have to have the way power, that's the path to get there, and the willpower, the motivation, and the agency to be able to get to that big, hairy, audacious goal. So like Ken was saying, $1 billion company by your third year of operation, that's definitely a BHAG. Let's break that down. Let's make sure that that is reasonable, of course. But yeah, I mean, if Ken's got a plan and he's got the willpower and the motivation to get there and the agency, and there are elements in there that he can control, I think it fits.
I mean, you used some big words there. You said way power and willpower.
Yeah.
Can you please define what you mean by way power?
Way power is the pathway, because it's great to set a goal, but those goals without any pathway to get there, those are not very helpful goals. This is also one of the differences, I would say, between positive thinking, which is, kind of imagine it and it will happen, and positive psychology. Positive psychology says we need a way to get there. We can't just dream up these ambitions and these ideas without a way power. If we don't see the path to get there, we're not going to be able to realize those goals.
Okay. In terms of hope, does it actually lead to better performance of the team or the workers if we have it?
I'd say yes, just to chime in here. Hope is definitely related to performance, and also just general organizational improvement. And so research shows things like, when you're thinking about performance, a lot of the times that's put in the context of year-end reviews, maybe for a sales team, how they're performing against their forecast or goal. But organizationally, performance is really tied to something as specific as, having the indication of higher hope, but also retention, right? Retention is a great indicator of how an organization performs, because if it sucks showing up to work each day, and I have diminishing hope on my desire to want to stay in the organization, that's a direct dollar that the organization has to account for. It's 230%. That's the cost of hiring a new employee and getting them up to speed when you lose someone in the organization. And so we've seen hope actually have a few different direct links to improving someone's desire to have retention to stay, improving an organization's performance. But I also think that hope is tied to performance in the micro moments. And so I think a quick kind of trailer to what I want to talk about is, how do individuals and organizations set daily goals and tying that to hope and an outcome? And I think that's a really important but probably underutilized practice for organizations to really perform well. You can have your BHAG, right, which might be to blow out, quarterly earnings or to blow out your yearly forecast. But if you can't zero in on how you're going to do that today, then you're really not setting up that pathway to be as successful as it can be.
So what are some of the things I would do today to help, if you want to start there?
I'm sure everyone here has their own sort of positive intervention, so I'm going to let someone else take that.
All right.
I think it's really, I'll start. I think that there's, and if you think about those three things that Lisa talked about in terms of goals, willpower, and waypower, each one of those, I think, has very specific things. So let's just talk about goals setting right now, especially in the context of the pandemic and everything that we're going through. We have to do a lot of re-goaling right now, like thinking about what the right goals are for right now. I'd actually challenge some of the notion that a BHAG is the thing that we might actually want right now in the context of the pandemic. And in the context of the unknowability and the VUCA world, the volatility and the uncertainty and the complexity and the ambiguity of this period of time, to be able to set long-term goals that may be unrealistic right now are one of the guaranteed kind of like killers of hope in this context. One of the most important things about the kind of goals that we set are that they are actually realistic and achievable in this period of time right now. That's actually a really important ingredient in hope. So I would say the first thing that I would do for as a leader in this period of time is at an organizational level, really think about, are the goals that I've set actually realistic, and or do I need to do some re-goaling to make sure that we can actually find the things that we're working on challenging, but also make sure that we are actually able to be achieving those goals. That would be true at an organizational level, but I also think that it's really true at an individual level. I think all of us need to be aware of the kind of goals that we've set for each ourselves and ask ourselves, is this goal actually giving me hope right now, or is this goal actually taking hope away from me right now? And how can I really rethink about steps in the right direction, even if I can't solve for that BHAG altogether? That would be the first thing I would do.
I love this notion of re-goaling, and we certainly saw that really early on in the pandemic as companies were closing their offices and sending people home to be safe. That ended up being a goal. Let's make sure that everybody is safe. Let's make sure that people can work from home. Let's make sure that people are connected and that their well-being has been looked after. Business goals don't have to be just about the money, the bottom line, the sales, the quarterly earnings, all of those pieces. And now we are seeing goals around well-being. We're seeing goals around supporting managers. We're seeing goals around people shutting down at 5 o'clock. And that becomes the daily goal. I'm closing my computer and I am spending family time. So the goals, I think that re-goaling piece and the little things, what can I accomplish today? Those are also hugely motivating.
I love that. The example you just brought up, Lisa, because I think it's so helpful in terms of using a really practical example that probably anybody listening to this call can really think of to understand what we mean by hope. So the challenge of, we have to send everybody who used to work here home, and they have to go home tomorrow. Like that challenge, or we have a week to be able to figure this out, as a mechanism for understanding how hope theory works. Like, the goal is everyone needs to be able to work remotely starting Monday. Like, the willpower part of that, why is that so important? Because we need to protect human lives here. The lives of our people are ultimately more important to us right now than being able to have to just come into the office and stay business as usual. So our willpower is really strong. We have a kind of external motivation that's coming from government forces, but we also have intrinsic motivation to make sure that the people who we work with on a day-to-day basis are safe. And then there's all of this waypower to be able to make that happen. Everybody comes together to think about all of the different ways that they'll need to think about the obstacles that are going to come in there. Do people have internet access? Do people have secure tokens to be able to log in different ways? Do people have a space to be able to work? Are we going to be able to have team meetings? How are we going to engage with our clients? How are we going to make sure that the things that are on site are taken care of while we're not there? Thinking through all of those potential obstacles and the ways in which we need to be able to solve that problem in the moment creates the condition for hope. You have a very solid goal to get everyone home. You have a lot of willpower. We need to keep people safe. And we have a lot of waypower in terms of all of the mechanisms to be able to make that happen. That created a lot of magic for a lot of companies. I mean, there are a lot of companies, say most organizations that I'm aware of, who are quite frankly shocked by what they were able to accomplish in no time. I mean, literally, people were able to jump frog the virtual work conundrum by like a decade in most cases, by having that really, really, really clear set of goals, willpower and waypower. And that's the superpower of hope.
I also think it's important to you were talking about being flexible in some ways with goals, and also recognize that you've got different levels of goals. You have to have some right-sized goals. So I do believe in having big, hairy, audacious goals. If you have only a single big, audacious, hairy goal, let's say I want this particular job. I like a 6-figure job, and that's my goal. If I don't create sub goals within that, then I may be swinging for the fences with each step and getting demotivated as I go because I'm not getting there in one step. So to have smaller goals so that you can feel the positive momentum, the dopamine that comes from reaching small goals is critically important. And having, in very stressful times, having those goals be retooled toward your activities, things that are within your power. So I don't have power over whether I'm going to get hired, but I do have the power to send out 8 resumes, make 6 calls to set up informational interviews, and just redefining what my immediate goal is as an action has the potential to get some momentum, make me feel like I'm making progress, and move toward that larger goal.
Okay, so just picking up on that. So if I am a person who is long-term unemployed, and we actually got a question from somebody in our audience, and I'm going to just try and throw this up here. But basically, I'm long-term unemployed. I don't really have good prospects, and I've kind of lost hope. I mean, how can I apply this here? What would you say? And I know you said you need to set some goals for sending out resumes, but that to me doesn't seem like it's going to help my sense of hopelessness. Like if I've lost hope, what can I do? Is there science for that?
I'll chime in.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go Chad.
Go Chad.
So what I'd say is there is science here, but the science honestly is irrelevant if all you can think about is unemployment, right? And you have rent to pay the next day. So like one of the benefits of positive psychology is that we don't get so high in our ivory tower that we can't realize that the people on the ground need to eat. And as someone that like understands the barriers, at least to attaining employment that I really want, that's a real drag, right? I know when I was working in big corporate America, I applied to 26 different jobs, of which 24 I got rejected from, and 2 gave me an offer. And it was one of those 2 that gave me the offer is the place I'm at now. I lost a lot of hope when I was hopping on a plane Monday through Thursday in different time zones, working 60 hours a week by Thursday and going to grad school. It was hard to have a lot of hope there. But the only thing that I was able to do was to say, well, you really have 2 options. Losing hope puts you in a permanent state of gray fog where there actually isn't a next step. And the reason that that's really dangerous is because once you lose hope, that impacts virtually everything in your life, your relationships, your physical health, and your mental health. And so unless your option is to be completely in the abyss, then that's you have the other option. It's a binary decision. It's take a step forward the next day. And so what I think when people think about hope, it's like, well, hope isn't what's going to get me there. You're right. Hope is the fuel, the vehicle in the car, and the agency is you as the person. And so hope in a really deep sense needs to be the fuel that you use to say, hey, that interview really sucked and I didn't get the job. I'm going to at least spend 5 minutes today on LinkedIn looking at the next job description. And so tying hope to a larger goal, which is to evolve or elevate from your situation, is of critical importance. And I think a lot of the times we expect hope to be the end all be all when it really is just the fuel that you put into the tank. The vehicle, the person that can do it is actually you. And corralling yourself around that positive affirmation that at least I'm taking a try, that's why hope is really critical. And tying that to some small incremental goal is how I personally have gotten through those really difficult times.
So if I can go back to the waypower as well, sometimes you need to recognize that the path that you are on is well and truly and solidly blocked. And so part of hope theory says that you may keep the same goal, but you might look at different ways to get there. So I think these days we all recognize that you could send out 100 resumes a day, and a lot of them are going to get blocked and never seen by a human being. So that might not be the best way to get to your goal of employment. And you might have to look at other ways of getting there. The other thing is sometimes your goals do need adjusting. People need money, people need to eat, people need to pay their rent and their mortgage and all those sorts of things. But perhaps there are other ways to get the money rather than looking for a job. Perhaps there is, the gig economy. Perhaps there is self-employment. I know at one point it took me 10 years to find a job, and I went in and out of the gig economy and self-employment during that time. I think hope theory is still highly relevant there. It's just recognizing that once you have a goal, you don't necessarily keep the same goal. Once you have a path, you don't necessarily keep the same path. And I love Chad's piece about that willpower, that agency, that motivation. That's what's going to keep you going. Without hope, we can't change the goals and we can't change the path either. So that flexibility becomes really important.
Well, that's why I started to put up a question about learn helplessness, because I think that's something we had talked about in a pre-call. But that seems one of the dangers of what Chad was talking about, is that I get into this vicious downward cycle that I can't get out of this. And so what is learned helplessness?
It's a good question. So learned helplessness is actually, I think, a lot of where the research on hope ultimately originally started. Learned helplessness was the work of a guy named Martin Seligman. Seligman started. He's at Penn. He started teaching. He started studying the conditions of why do people give up about 50 years ago. That was kind of his central question. He was looking at specifically depression, and it seemed from a clinical psychological perspective that there were just certain people who seemed to give up. So he started looking in laboratory settings, initially with animals and then with humans, and kind of really testing the conditions of what is it that makes people seem to give up when adversity hits them. Literally, you get thrown and bombarded with all of these things from left, right, and center, and eventually you just you literally just stop trying. He did actually a lot of his tests initially with dogs, for example, who would kind of be they'd be shocked every time that they tried to, with small shocks, every time they tried to get something that they wanted to eat, and eventually you have the situation, the default situation where most dogs just will give up. And the same kind of things with humans. We don't need to be shocked. We get all sorts of different kinds of shocks in all sorts of different kinds of ways, often, and especially in our work situation, where we try to do things and it feels like no matter what we try, it ultimately is all pointless. Now, the thing that was really interesting about what Seligman discovered was that he was actually asking the wrong question. It seemed, based on his research, that actually the default is that if you take away our control, most people do give up. But what was curious in his data set was that it always seemed like there was about a third of any general population that he was studying who didn't give up. No matter how much adversity or challenge or shocks that population was given, there was about always a third of people who seemed relentlessly willing to keep trying. And kind of fast forward 50 years, the answer is that we actually have a circuit in our brain called the DRN, I think is the dorsal reflex
network or something.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a circuit within our brain that when it is turned off, it's a standard. Their standard our standard experience is that neural circuitry is turned off, and so we do give up in the face of adversity, but that we are actually able to turn it on, and you're able to turn it on through concrete training and interventions, and that when it's turned on, that's when you ultimately are going to fight for whatever it is that you're striving to be able to fight for. You keep going depending on whatever the adversity you has. So that all that work on learned helplessness ultimately turned into work on what Marty discovered was that, again, the secret of that kind of hope circuit, as he's now called it, is actually optimism and a sense of agency and control. So interventions that can specifically teach people how to control what may feel like uncontrollable situations is actually the secret for being able to turn that hope circuit on in our brains and be able to keep fighting even in the context of extraordinary adversity.
Joe, if I were to teach a 7-year-old how to shoot a basket, and I started out the 3-point line, they're not going to hit any basket. They're not even going to come close. If I move that child up to, let's say, a little in front of the foul line, they actually might hit some, but at that point they've already gotten the habit of mind of what's the point, and their tries are going to be very low energy, if at all. So if I'm going to get that child over the hump, I want to make things, put things within a range that they can start to find some level of success to build up some hope that they can then go further and further out and start making shots. And maybe the goal has to be reoriented from making the ball go in to simply having a follow through so that the rotation goes backward. Or that I start shooting by bending my knees and popping up and seeing how high I can get the ball and re-goaling. So there are analogies there on how I might attempt to reshift what I'm doing in a job search.
So Ken, let me ask you just a follow-up.
Yeah,
so
please.
I'm trying to teach I like the basketball analogy because I think it's very powerful. So if I'm trying to teach somebody basketball now, and I start at the 3-point line and I slowly move in, or if I start with layups and then I slowly work my way out, which way's better?
I think all of us would say intuitively and correctly that starting with a higher success rate is going to be more motivating. And then as people move out, that they will have enough of the success rate to keep going. That said, if we start with layups and then go immediately to the 3-point line, then my level of hope may go down. And I would want to get close enough again, find enough wins or redefine what those wins are so that I can keep that motivation up.
Okay.
And
This is,
sorry, one more thing. And hopefully have social support around me that's going to foster the idea and reinforce the idea that, you know what, we eventually will be able to shoot that 3-pointer.
Yep.
We can also get some of that hope from other people, and that social support piece is very important.
So Lisa, you're going to say something?
yeah, this is also making me think about the progress principle by Teresa Amabile and Stephen Kramer, I believe, at Harvard, where the ability to see yourself making progress is hugely motivating and hope inspiring. And that helps you to keep going. So I really appreciate Ken's point about if we go straight from layups to the 3-point line, you're not seeing the progress. When something gets too easy, that's also not inspirational and motivating. People achieve by setting harder and harder goals and getting outside that comfort zone into the learning zone. And so when we see that we are making progress, we don't even necessarily need other people to see it or to recognize it or to reward us for it. But when we see and feel that we are making progress and growing and developing, that can be hugely hope inspiring.
Guys, it seems to be a great time to just introduce growth mindset. Someone want to tackle that?
Go for it, Ken. Or Chad, you were going to do it?
No, Ken, please. Go ahead, Ken.
Sure. So growth mindset is the idea. Many people have a perception of their intelligence, their talents, their abilities that's fixed. I'm either good at this, I'm not good at this, I'm naturally good at this, or I'm not. Growth mindset has a different twist. Growth mindset, the internal dialogue says, I'm someone who tries hard. My abilities, my intelligence, my capabilities are malleable. The more I work, the better I will get. And people with growth mindset are much more apt to not give up as easily. They're not focused on proving how smart or how good they are. They're focused on improving and learning. The way I would, when selling summer camp, describe this is you have two children, and they're both given, this is an actual study done, two fifth graders. They're both given a set of puzzles, easy puzzles. Researcher comes by and says to the first one, congratulations, you did the puzzle. You're very smart. The second one, congratulations, you did the puzzle. You worked very hard. Then the child was given a puzzle with no answer. And they simply timed to see how long until that child gave up. By having that one intervention, changing 3 words, the second child, the one who was praised on how hard he or she worked, went almost 3 times as long before giving up. So putting that focus on the activity and the growth rather than the proof of I'm either good or I'm not, can have a big impact on how hard we're willing to try and how much efficacy and agency we feel as we try.
So if I'm faced with uncertainty and making a decision, and I'm trying to put together a team to do that, and I'm trying to apply what we're talking about here, is it more important that I basically tell the team that we need a good process, and by the good process, we're going to try and figure out an answer? Or is it more important to say, here's where we're going, and this is how I think we're going to get there? Like how do I approach that problem, applying some of the theories here? So I have a lot of uncertainty about something, whether it's, let's say I'm trying to figure out, do I go to school in the spring? Are we going to do in class, or are we going to do online, or some form of blended? And I got to now make that decision for January. All right. So what do? I pull my team together. How do I set the goals? How do I do the growth mindset? How do I establish the hope? What should I do?
It's funny. It's fine, Joe. As you asked the question, I actually inverted it in my mind.
Okay.
Typically, what happens very often is you need all 3 pieces of hope theory to be effective. You need to have clear goals. You need to have a path or belief in the path, a flexible path, and you need to have motivation. And very often, leaders will be very high on one, maybe have some thoughts on the second, and entirely leave out the third. So if there's no mechanism for the motivation, what are we going to do when we have hardships? If the goals are not clear enough, if our goal is high quality and not specific enough, or if the path is not clear enough or believable enough, if any of those 3 components is weak, then you're not likely to make progress.
So go ahead, Chad.
One thing that's also, I think, critical for organizations or for teams, let's say personal or professional teams, is getting that consensus of corporate hope, and that what is the thing that unifies us together, that points us towards that common goal that we want to see occur. Because the truth is, if you think about it from a sports analogy, like a team has the desire to win a game, right? The outcome's going to be binary. Either you're going to be on the winning side or the losing side, but you're marching towards that pathway together, right? And if you're taking the student mindset as a team to say, hey, this is where we want to go, irrespective of how we get there, we're going to learn. That's critically important, and that should always be a part of the motivation that gets you there, is that we're going to learn from this because we're all united towards a goal. I think a lot of the times what happens is that we point at a goal, we don't have the corporate motivation on how we're going to get there, and then we don't achieve it, and then finger pointing starts, right? That is a recipe for a disaster, for toxic relationships between teams. And even thinking about it from a family or relational context, families probably want to see each other more. If there's nothing that's undergirding that family of how do we get through COVID-19 together, right, versus how do I meet my individual needs, you're not setting up a family dynamic for success either. And so a lot of parents right now are thinking about, how the heck am I going to offer maybe homeschooling or some type of schooling for my children for the first, semester or first trimester while still having to work full time, right? If there isn't a conversation that occurs where you hear from your children of what their hopes are, and obviously as the parents, you can make some informed decision, those lines of communication are critically important. And right now, there is a desire for a lot of leaders and organizations to figure out, how do I sustain performance by getting consensus on hope? Because my hope as a person might be different than what I think my team should be. And so this idea of role for me is the first circle, team as a second circle, the organization as a third, and world as a fourth. Drawing that through line to figure out what your North Star is really important, but without communicating that out to people, you're really just having a bunch of people in their own kayaks kind of trying to get to the same place.
So what you bring up, though, suggests, I like the idea of the North Star, but what if we have different North Stars? And I just want to bring it back to our real world. We're going to have an election in November, and we have, two sides, two tribes that have completely different points of view on what hope is. And to some degree, it's almost zero sum, because the hope that one side is looking for is actually antithetical to what the hope that the other side is looking for. And as a leader, how do you put that together?
I might take us down a little bit of a tangent here, but what's coming up for me, Joe, is negotiations theory. And anybody who's read Getting to Yes is going to be familiar with the difference between positions and interests. And I think quite often goals are phrased as positions, right? I want the orange. No, I want the orange. But the question then becomes, what are the interests behind that? And my suspicion is that when we take people of different political leanings, that once you start scratching at the surface and find out what are the interests, most people are really looking for the same sort of things, right? Most people want safety, for example. Most people want a sense of community. Most people want a sense of well-being. Most people want a sense of financial security. I bet that's common across a lot of the political spectrum and other ideologies. The difference might be in the waypower. What is it that we see as the pathway to get there? But I think if we can start with conversations around what are the interests and what are the fundamental needs that people are getting at, our goals might actually shift a little bit, and we might be able to focus on some really creative, collaborative ways to get there. I really love Chad's word consensus, because when people are part of the process and they're part of the discussion, and I'm bringing a lot of change management theory into this as well, they're much more likely to be committed to the process and to the outcomes once they've had that inclusion and consensus and collaboration at the beginning.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like double say yes on everything that Lisa has just said. But as she was describing that, it made me think of hope theory in a slightly different way than I've ever thought about it before. Can you bring up that triangle again?
Sure. One of the three parts of hope.
Yeah, exactly. In some ways, this is a why, what, how triangle, right? Yeah. The goal is the what, the why is the willpower, and the how is the waypower. And I think that we often start with what, and I think that's the position that Lisa was just talking about from classic negotiation. We start with the what, and we also know that like starting with why is extremely critical. So we can, like, we don't necessarily have to have that triangle always start with goals. We can start with willpower. We can start with our why and really understand what's the thing that is driving all of us here that's really important that we have to get right. Or we can even start with the how. We can start with like a very concrete, thing that we want to be able to do, and then try to figure out. You could potentially start from any place within that hope theory triad. But I also completely agree that if you're a leader and you think that you can give a hope roadmap to people without them actually participating, you have missed the whole boat in terms of how you actually build hope. Hope has to be constructed by the people who are going through it, and it has to be constructed through dialogue. And so, yeah, if we're talking about political context, like the only way that we're going to get to any kind of progress is through dialogue and communication, and through understanding people's goals, willpower, and waypower.
So sorry, Andrew, I want to be very practical because I work with a lot of CEOs. So I'm the CEO. I have authority. Why can't I just prescribe that direction?
Because no one will own what you prescribe.
Well, let me say you can, but what you will get is mere compliance out of positional power. You will not get true agentic thinking and action.
Yeah. And as obstacles get thrown at people, if you haven't thought everything through, which you won't be able to think everything through because we live in complex times where not everything is thinkable. If you haven't thought that through and people run into obstacles, they won't have the waypower to be able to solve them. Or if you take away the hammer and the pressure of incentives and rewards or punishment, they won't have the willpower to be able to make it happen. So, and people might not be able to even achieve the goals that you set, and might not feel like those are realistic or even possible in this particular moment. So if you're doing that work for people, you're removing their capacity for high performance.
So that's where the fine line exists, Joe. I think if you can pulse your organization so that you can declare the why and the what and give people the agency on how to get there, that's actually where you're operating, I think, in sort of organizational flow. So if you take an organization, I don't know, let's say something like a nonprofit, the why we exist, let's say, is to help eradicate, global hunger. The what is raising the funds and resources so that we can give, food or goods to this country or these nations. If that is what you've declared at the top, and you've given people the agency on how to get there on their own, that's really powerful, because you know that the why and the what is something that I can connect to as Chad. And whether I'm in sales or operations or in a janitorial position, I know that I get to participate in that mission. The problem is that there's not enough plasticity in organizational hope because it's set by a mission that's so rigid that no one else can sort of participate in it. So very practically, yes, a CEO should be able to declare from the top his or her view and expect people to participate in it. But if it's done in a vacuum where I don't have that autonomy or agency, then it's not going to be a good situation for anyone.
And go ahead, Ken.
Oh, sure. I also think, of course, we have to be realistic and pragmatic, not Pollyannic. You can have a terrific leader, you can have a very clear goal, and you may have some people who might not get on board. I think of Dr. Fauci back in the mid 80s. I believe it was National Institute of Health, where he wanted to make a primary focus AIDS research, and he rallied the troops, and he got quite a bit of support, and it released a lot of energy. And there were some researchers who, back in the politics of the day, really just did not want to work with the populations and did not believe in doing it. After several tries, he ended up letting those people go. So this isn't so magical that you're always going to get everyone. Sometimes pursuing that goal means choosing the team who are aligned with that goal, even as you're inspiring them toward pursuing it.
So the word that jumped into my mind as Chad was talking as well is meaning. It seems like a leader has to establish meaning for whoever the people that they're being led, because otherwise that's what it seems like you're describing, that aspect of it as you're talking about this.
Yeah, I think we as humans get so far off track from our initial goal that it takes us to spiral all the way to the left or to the right to realize, holy crap, like this is not where I wanted to start. And meaning is really important for CEOs or for any person in a position of authority to not consistently go back and tap into that meaning and the remembering or the recollection of why. You're also not setting yourself up for success. And so Even if your CEO doesn't do that, because not every CEO is perfect, you as an individual employee, as a person, you have to do that. And what most of us don't do, especially in the midst of times that are frenetic or chaotic or downright shitty, we don't go back to our initial, why is this important to me? I think that setting up those interventions so you can get access or time to do that is of critical importance. Every day, something really simple that I do, I have two to-do lists. I have the things I need to do today on my left side, and then the right side is what the universe will do for me. This might sound a little bit woo-woo, but it actually helps because I get to anchor on something outside of work every day that I want to see occur. Sometimes what I'll say the universe will do for me is I will have an incredible prospect call, or I will learn something new about how to navigate sales in a post-COVID world. I'll laugh today at something that was unexpected. And that to me is the deep meaning of what intrinsically do I want to feel like when I'm showing up at work, and what are those motivations that I can tap into? If we can learn those practices, that's really important.
Yeah, can we go around and just say what our favorite meaning intervention is personally that helps you build hope in the course of the day?
Yeah, I just did mine. So
yeah.
Okay, good. Lisa, Andrew, Ken.
I'll start with mine. I'm a huge fan of the notion of cognitive reframing, which is like a big job crafting skill. But the idea that every task that I do in the course of the day can be connected to either something that I value, or a strength that I have, or a passion that I have. So, for example, I love thinking about the fact that I love cooking. Cooking is like a deep passion of mine, and so I can literally think of my day as kind of in the metaphor of preparing a meal, and it actually really drives me up. There's some parts of my day that are about prepping. There's some parts of the day that are actually about cooking. There's some parts of the day that are about doing the dishes, and I can literally organize my day. And there's some parts of my day that are about the eating and being able to savor what I'm actually doing. So really rethinking my day in the context of how can I make it fit a central metaphor of a passion of mine is a way that I stay engaged and find meaning and find hope in it.
Okay, helpful suggestion. Lisa, Ken?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is a lot of the work that I do is in service of somebody else. And to be able to put myself into their position and say, what is it that this is delivering for them? What pain points does this solve? How does this help them move forward? How does this help them to have a better team, a better organization, a better work experience, whatever that is? Because there are some parts of everybody's job that you just don't like doing, right? So like the other day, I was playing around with a whole bunch of boxes on an org chart and filling in position numbers and salary details and a lot of niggly stuff. You just kind of go like, oh, why am I doing this? Well, that is really going to help a whole bunch of people in this organizational unit have a better experience, have better communication channels, have better workflow. And when I think about what it is that they're getting, that gives me meaning to help me get through some of those things that are maybe a little bit less enjoyable for me, but really contribute to somebody else.
Great. Ken?
Sure. I'm actually going to go back in time a little bit. I used to run a large summer camp, 1,500 kids and 530 staff. And I used to joke that this was a job I would not trade for anything and not wish on anyone. On a given day, if I looked at the activities that I did, particularly in the spring and summer, it was pretty brutal. Rarely does someone make a phone call to speak to the director because everything is so wonderful and they just want to share that. At the same time, I also recognized that and saw that there were many children for whom I was providing, or the activities I was doing was helping to provide a truly transformative experience. So that would be I wouldn't trade it for anyone. So if you're going through the most difficult, stressful situation, having that clear North Star that I'm doing this so that I get to provide what is something that is tremendously meaningful to me. This is a small price to pay for the opportunity to do this.
That's great. So I'm not the expert here, but I will, since you talked about a personal example, you did remind me of something. When I was in high school a long time ago, I was at Davidson basketball camp. We were playing 3-on-3 and actually did fairly well. But the point is, what our coach said was he actually made us practice every day for 15 minutes without a basketball, and we would just shadow shoot. And literally just you just had to go entire drills, everything else, no ball, shadow shooting at the basket. We ended up winning the 3-on-3 championship, and I'll tell you, my personal best was always there, because I would just hit shots after doing that I would never hit if in regular practice. And I learned something, that it's almost like the power of positive thinking, which is what I try to do. And I don't do this daily, but maybe I should do it more often, per Chad's suggestion, is think in advance about something and how it's going to play out and successful. And it typically does. And so if you can kind of visualize that positive experience, I think that's another way of being helpful. So that would be my tip.
It's a great description of waypower.
I was just thinking that takes us right back to that triangle. That's beautiful.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So as I used to like to say, if you can believe it, you can achieve it. So that's what we're going to have to focus on. So I know we're running to the end of our time. Unfortunately, our technical glitch at the beginning, so I apologize for that. But I guess the last thing I'd like us to think about as we give advice to people is it too late for hope? Meaning, if I'm gone past and I haven't done the things right, whether it's my team, whether it's individual, whether it's an organization, am I a lost cause, or are there some things that I can do to start picking up the pieces when all seems to be lost? Where would you tell them to start? Where do I put that first effort into?
I would encourage. The answer is no. It is never too late. Every day is a new day. Every moment is a new moment to try to recover your hope, and to think very deliberately about what is within the zone of your control. There's so many things in the world right now that we cannot control, but the things that we can control are how we think, feel, and what we choose to do. And so I would encourage you to start by just rethinking about how you're thinking about things. Is there a different way you can think about it, and what's your why and what's your how to be able to do that?
And I would add to that if this seems too big a burden for you yourself, you don't have to do it alone. Reach out to somebody who has your back. Reach out to somebody who believes in you. Reach out to somebody who will support you. And maybe you can get some of that boost from working with somebody else. Because once the movement is there, once you've got that forward motion, it's going to be a lot easier to keep that going. And so if you're finding that hard to create on your own, reach out. These are great times to enter into community with other people.
Ken?
I would say get in motion. So when you're feeling no hope, it's akin to having a piece of paper in front of you. It is literally paper thin. You can poke through it any time, and you have the power to poke through, but because it's opaque, you can't imagine it. You can't imagine what's on the other side. I have a friend in New York who, when he would get down, he would walk down the street and he would wave and say hi to random people on the street, not even have conversations, just wave and say hi. And being in motion, going through, smiling, getting a smile back, he would start to pick up his step. And pretty soon he put himself in a different state, in a different mood, where he felt like himself again. He felt more hopeful, and he was able to go on his day and achieve things. I thought that was a terrific way to do it.
That's great.
Last thing I'd say is, visualizing hope and taking the action are critical. And so just closing your eyes and thinking about what the prototype of hope looks like for you today, and asking yourself the question, how can I move 1 inch closer towards that? Start there. That is going to be more progress than probably any of your peers will make that are feeling down. And so moving that inch is of critical importance.
Well, for me, this has been a learning opportunity. So I'm going to go back to your triangle. When I feel that I'm struggling, or when I'm talking to leaders that are struggling, I'm going to bring up this hope triangle. And I'm going to say that are we balancing these three things? Because it's a system, because the goals are not enough, and the willpower is not enough, and the waypower is not enough. And you need a combination of three. And if you're just on one or the other, then that's not going to be enough. And I think that's really critical. And then the other word that I'll add to it is the meaning aspect of it, is that you can't just provide a goal without meaning. And that's so critical to, as you said, you can't just use authority. And I think, if I get political for a second, I think that's one of the biggest problems we're having with our president right now, is that he is all about just pushing authority, and he's not getting the people on the bus with the context to want to come along. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think a lot of the goals are being achieved, for many other reasons, given the framing of what you talked about today. But that's where I would start. So, and again, unfortunately, we are coming to our end. We do have a quick comment from the group here, so I'm going to post it up just to get final words on this one from Luis Aloro.
Thanks, Louis.
Thanks, Louis.
Thanks, Louis.
So, like the idea of re-goaling, which is, again, critical, because I think most people don't assume that you can re-goal. I think they feel that when you change your goals, it's almost failure. Can you just make one final comment about that? How do I make sure that, because I guess people worry about that. They can't admit they're wrong. And so if I change my goal, then I'm admitting I'm wrong. And is that okay?
Yes.
I think most people choose their goals with the best information that they had at the time. And being able to change your mind is a remarkable sign of maturity and recognizing that new knowledge brings new insight, and that could bring new goals. It's perfectly okay to do that.
But it's not weakness.
I'm going to say no, not at all.
Joe, we were having fun with basketball analogies. I may be Michael Jordan. Can be driving to the hoop. He's the best player on the court. He's the best athlete. And if the lane is clogged, he's going to kick it out to someone else for a free open shot. Re-goaling is a huge strength. And the wisdom to understand when it's appropriate.
Actually, I'll use a different Michael Jordan analogy, which is when he was scoring 50, 60 points a game in his early career, and he was the best player in the world, they didn't win a single championship.
Absolutely.
When he started to realize that they were a team of 5 people and he brought everybody else along, they won 6 championships.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make that argument. I think that's very valid. Team around.
Going to Ken's statement about growth mindset, I think that the only failure is from re-goaling is a failure of not learning from why you've re-goaled.
Yeah. Well, again, I appreciate the comments today. I appreciate the rules and the opportunity to learn about the power of hope and the science of hope around it and the key elements. If you want to learn more about any of this or connect with any of our subject matter experts, feel free to reach out to us, and you can get their contact information at the learningcommunities.com website. Sorry for the technical difficulties at the beginning of this office hours. Hopefully I'll be able to edit them out on the rebroadcast. But again, I want to thank everybody for your time today and look forward to hopefully getting you back on a future episode. This will conclude our broadcast, and hope everybody has a safe and pleasant day. Take care, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.